Last week, I ran into a video on YouTube made by Switch to Linux, and he was going over the new Firefox 89. And he didn't have any problems with the UI elements, he couldn't care less. But he did have a problem with one feature that was enabled by default, which was encrypted DNS. He stated that, yes, encrypted DNS shouldn't be enabled by default, which I agree with. That should be something that a user should decide to turn on or turn off. But he went so far as to say that encrypted DNS in general is a terrible thing and it shouldn't be enabled because it can bypass a lot of the security you may have enabled on your network and or parental controls. And while that is true, that doesn't mean that encrypted DNS as a whole is bad. In fact, there are other DNS providers, NextDNS, that allow you to enable security features and parental controls on a DNS level so you can still have encrypted DNS with good security and parental controls. So you can have the best of both worlds without outright saying all encrypted DNS is terrible. So today, I want to talk to you about NextDNS, quickly go over what it is and some of the other features, but more importantly, to go over the parental controls and the security features that you can enable to make it as good as possible. So, let's get into it. So what is NextDNS? Well, they are an encrypted DNS provider, and they've got actually really good security, privacy, and parental control features, and even analytics and logs. The best part is that unlike other DNS providers like Cloudflare, Google DNS, and the others, you have the control to turn features on or off as you see fit, even logging. If you don't want logging on, you can just turn it off. It's as simple as that. And it's really easy to set up on a device-by-device basis or even on your entire network if you're using something like Ubiquity. So, enough going over the website. Let's jump into the user interface and see what that actually looks like. So, to get started, all you have to do is click on this Try Now button and you're automatically jumped in to the user interface. So, basically how this works is you get like a trial period of NextDNS to try their service and see how you like it. If you really like them, you want to continue using them, you sign up with an account and all they ask for is an email, and you can use a burner address. It doesn't have to be your actual personal email. And then with the account, you can save all the settings that you want. Now there is one thing to keep in mind with NextDNS, and that it's not entirely free unlike other DNS providers. So you do have a free account, but you only get about 300,000 queries per month. Now you can see how many queries are actually going through each month with the analytics and just keep those on to see that in detail. But more than likely you deal with probably more than 300,000 queries because DNS isn't just about, oh, I went to this website. Okay, what other websites did you end up connecting to when you visited that website? Those all count as queries, so that might end up getting used up pretty quickly. If you want unlimited queries, you're going to have to go with the Pro account. Now you might wonder why they're charging for money and why it is that they just don't provide it for free like Cloudflare, like DNS Watch and all the other privacy-based DNS providers. Well, unlike those other DNS providers, they're not trying to sell your data to make money or sell you ads or any other garbage like that. They make their money from their premium plans. That's where they get it from, nowhere else. So you know that unlike other services where you're the product, in this situation, they are the product. So with that out of the way, let's get back and let's actually look at what the user interface has to offer. So there's a lot of stuff going on here right out of the gates. And we're going to actually start over here with the linked IP. So if you're wanting to use this service without having to install any client on your device and you just want to connect the DNS servers to, say, your phone or your browser or what have you, you would link your IP address to those DNS servers and then you have all these features enabled. If you don't want to do that way and you want to use the regular client, you can follow the directions on the various setup guides. So you have one for Linux, Chrome OS, browsers, so follow the instructions that you go through. You can actually add this on a browser basis. You can add it on your entire OS. You have Windows, Android, iOS, and macOS, and as I showed earlier, Linux. So all your network traffic, or all your network DNS traffic rather, ends up being encrypted. And it's either encrypted over TLS or HTTPS. And actually, more often than not, it's using TLS, not HTTPS, which works in a different way. And I'll leave a link in the description that goes over more detail how encrypted DNS works and what the difference is between HTTPS and TLS. But what we're here to discuss is not the ins and outs of NextDNS and how to set it up and how encrypted DNS works. What we're going to do is sort of squash the theory that encrypted DNS is all bad because you can't enable good security protocols or parental controls with that feature, which isn't true. So right out of the gate, you jump into security and you see that you have all these different options that you can turn on and off as you see fit. So if you don't want threat intelligence feeds, turn it off. Google safe browsing, turn it off. Cryptojacking protection, sure. DNS rebinding protection, sure. And it actually tells you what each thing is, so you're not going in here blind, just turning things on and off as you see fit. I would recommend turning most of these on though, because honestly, a lot of these aren't going to do you any harm. It's not going to keep you from accessing any websites. It's just going to help protect your overall browsing experience. Then you can jump into privacy, and this is where you have the ad blocking and tracker blocking features. By default, NextDNS ads and trackers block list is enabled, but you can simply go in and remove it. You can also go in here and add a block list, and there are an absolute crap ton of lists to choose from with links to connect to see what it is you're actually going in and adding in. So you're not just, again, guessing. You're not going in blind. You can see all the information you need before you make a decision. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the native tracking protection because that's a beta feature and it might end up causing some issues, so I would not enable that right now because you want to make sure all your DNS queries are working as well as they can. What I would do is disable blocked, disguised third-party trackers. The thing is, there are a lot of services out there, like streaming services, that actually use that feature, and if you have it enabled, they won't load properly. And the reason is they want to try to hide a bunch of garbage so they can track and see what you're doing, which is really shady, but you want to ensure that you can stream your HBO Max, your Netflix, your whatever without having any interference. So I would disable this right out of the gate. And now we get into the section of the video that actually talks about parental controls. So here, there are a multitude of things. You can add websites, apps, or games to block and restrict access to these features on a DNS level. Now, right out of the gate, there isn't that big of a list, and you might think that this feels kind of restricting and that there isn't more that you can add, but we'll get to that in a minute. But let's say you wanted to keep your kids from playing League of Legends, you wanted them, keep them from visiting Tinder, and for good measure, let's also throw in Reddit because they can run into some pretty creepy things on there, and you want to keep them from shopping on eBay and Amazon. So you add those in, and now all these websites, apps, and games, they do not have access to them. So if you went online and connected this configuration, as we showed earlier in the setup guide, with a browser or a device or network as a whole, they would not have access to any of these websites or applications. They try downloading Tinder.com, it won't connect because it's being blocked. Now you can even add a broader category of things. So like, let's say you don't want them getting to porn sites, so you can block that. You can block gambling, dating, piracy, social networks, and it will kind of go in and block many different websites that fall into that category. And I'm not sure if it will block all of them, so you might want to go in and test this yourself before enabling this for your kids. But this does do a good job of blocking as many of these websites as humanly possible to help prevent your kids from gaining access to something that they shouldn't. So let's say you're okay with your kids accessing these applications, but not all day. You only want them to have access to it at certain points in time during the day, or to not have access to it at certain point in times. That's where recreation time comes into play. You can come in here and say, hey, these days of the week from these times, those applications will not work, but the rest of the time they will. So maybe you don't want them to be able to access that stuff at school, so you turn it off during that period of time. Or you can maybe go in and say, okay, you have access to this when you get home, but only after you've done your homework. So you set a period of time for that. Now, if you don't want recreation time at all, you turn all this off, hit save, so it doesn't matter what time of the day it is. They never have access to it at any point in time, period. Hit save, and then it applies if you want to remove that and you want to make it so they never have access to those applications no matter what time of the day it is. You deselect those time frames, hit save, and then they are forever blocked from those website services or categories. Now, there are just a few more things in here that are really worthwhile that you might want to look into. There is the safe search, which any certain search engine like Google and DuckDuckGo, if they have a safe search option, this will force that website to use safe search. If it doesn't have a safe search option, this will try to block access to those websites. So I'm not sure if Bing has one or Yahoo does, but if they didn't, those will be blocked. You can also enable restricted mode on YouTube, which will help kind of keep kids from accessing age-restricted content on YouTube. And then blocking bypass methods. This makes it so if your kids try to go in and access a VPN or another DNS provider that can try to block what NextDNS is doing, this will help ensure that they cannot try to bypass your DNS settings and that they are forced to use the rules that you've set. So let's say you've set up everything perfectly with the parental controls, but you still don't want access to Google or Facebook in any way, shape, or form on your network, or MySpace or Twitter or whatever it is. That's where denialist comes into play. So you come into here and you add a domain. We're going to add Google. Now, every single time somebody tries to access Google or any of its subdomains, so drive.google.com, gmail.com, anything like that, it will be blocked. This will also apply to facebook.com. You can apply this to myspace.com. You can apply this to many different websites that you want, and all of its subdomains will also be blocked. And while this is a good parental control as well, it's mainly used for privacy reasons. So if you don't want Google, you don't want Facebook, you don't want MySpace or what have you, you can block that on a DNS level. Now, the allow list is pretty self-explanatory. It pretty much does the exact opposite. However, what it does is it overrides any of the protections you've had on any of the other tabs. So let's say you've enabled security features to, or even privacy features to block third-party trackers, but you want a certain website to be able to bypass that, like maybe a streaming service. So you can add Netflix.com to this, and it will automatically bypass, that website will bypass any of the security features you've enabled, including all of its subdomains. So earlier when I said you should probably keep this off to be safe, which I would still recommend, if you really wanted that on but you wanted to make sure other websites were still working like Netflix and HBO, you can go ahead in here and add this so those services are bypassing all the security features that you have. Now, there's also the Analytics tab, and this allows you to see all the different information about the various things that have gone through this DNS service, and I'm not going to go over all of them because there is a lot of information here, but you can get a good view on everything that's happening within your DNS queries. You also have access to your logs, so you can see what's actually going through and what's even being denied. And as I mentioned earlier, you can go into settings, and if you want, turn off logs. All gone whatsoever, and the ones that are already there, you can clear them, and they're gone. they won't see anything that you, essentially the way they go about things is they see what you can see. And if you've turned off logs on here, they don't have access to logs on their end. So that's a really nice feature. You can also go in and do a few things here, but I wouldn't mess with this much. I ran into issues myself when enabling things like cache boost and CNAME flattening, so I would leave those things off just to be safe. And if you want, let's say you go in and you add a new profile. So you have one with all these parental controls added for your kids' phones and their laptops or whatever else, but you don't want that on your computer. So you go in and you create a new configuration. We're going to call this test. You go in and you create it, and you can set separate settings for this profile for whatever you want, parental controls, deny list, denial list, whatever. And let's say you go in and you realize you don't need that anymore. Or let's say your kids grow up, they graduate, you don't need this profile anymore. You can go in and actually delete that configuration while still keeping your other one intact without screwing up the rest of your devices. Pretty nice feature and something that I really admire them having. So that was a look at NextDNS, an encrypted DNS provider that does a lot of the things that certain content creators online and other people online have a problem with when it comes to encrypted DNS. You can enable parental controls, block lists, privacy, security settings, all that on a DNS level and still have encrypted DNS. And because of that, it's something I would really highly recommend, because now it makes it harder for anybody trying to snoop on your network, whether that's an attacker or your internet service provider. It makes it harder for them to see what you're doing online. Now, it doesn't make it impossible. There are still many layers to the internet, and there are other ways that someone can take your traffic and figure out what you're doing. However, this does make it harder, and it's one step closer to enabling as much privacy on your network as humanly possible. And that's all I have to say about that. If you liked the video, click the like button. If you really liked it, feel free to subscribe to the channel, and I hope you have a wonderful day. See ya!